2 weeks ago, we looked at the prophet Amos and what he had to say about dealing with our enemies. And we summarized pretty much all that we talked about by saying this: be careful about wanting punishment for others, lest you be punished too. And then last week, we looked at the prophet Habakkuk and just kind of the self-righteous attitude that he started out with at the beginning and how it transitioned into an attitude more of faith. And that's something that lies open to all of us when we're dealing with our enemies, when we're dealing with life. And boy, oh boy, what a time to talk about enemies, huh? It's the holidays and everything. So for a lot of people, it's just a constant reminder of irritations. And we summed up pretty much last week, we could sum up by saying that what if their punishment would affect you? What if you had to be punished for their sake? And so tonight, we're going to look at the prophet Obadiah. And so if you didn't learn anything over this three-part series, at least you learned a little bit about the prophets. This prophet, his name was Obadiah, not quite as funny as Habakkuk, but I mean, I wouldn't name my kid Obadiah. I feel like he'd probably get a wedgie at school. He prophesied sometime around 553. So he prophesied about Edom, also called Esau in the book of Obadiah. And that's because Edom's ancestor was a man named Esau. Now, as far as who did Obadiah actually give the prophecy to, there's a lot of debate about that, but it seems like it's very likely that he was actually giving it to Israel concerning Esau. Just if you decide to go back and read it yourself. So Obadiah prophesied about 100 years after Habakkuk. So let me just kind of summarize a little bit so you can kind of remember things. God had his chosen people, Israel. Okay. Well, they separated into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Okay. And Amos prophesied when it was a divided nation into two nations. And then the northern kingdom was destroyed by a superpower called Assyria. And that's when the prophet Habakkuk prophesied. Well, so then time goes on, and the southern kingdom of Judah ends up being destroyed by another superpower called Babylon. And this is about 50-ish years after the southern kingdom was destroyed. So at this point, there is no nation of Israel. The Israelites have not been killed. Obviously, there's still Jews around today. So you know that they're not all dead, right? But the nation was destroyed. And so now enter in Obadiah. And you might say, well, what does Obadiah possibly have to say? They're already dead. They're already destroyed. I mean, there's not much point to this. Well, actually, there was a lot of point to it. The story didn't end there. That's actually something the prophet Jeremiah hinted at greatly. And so if you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, which for the Jews is kind of like one book. For us, it's two. You see the process of Israel going back to the Promised Land and settling back, which lasted for quite a few hundred years until they had this, a series of rebellions against Rome. But it ended with the destruction of Jerusalem in about 70 AD, about 40 years after Jesus, which was actually something Jesus prophesied about. He talked about the coming of war and how if you're out in the field, don't bother coming back. Be thankful, pray that women aren't in labor at that time because they won't be able to run from the wrath that is coming on Jerusalem. And it happened just like he said. He said that how the temple would be destroyed, and it was happened just like it. And it only took about 40 years. That's not that far distant. So then that happened, and then the rest of Israelite history is, it gets complicated after that. You've gotten different colonies here and there, and Russia, and I mean all over the place. But then, obviously with World War II, things changed again for them. But we're not going to be talking about all that. That's just to kind of give you an idea of the global timeline of Israel. Now that we kind of see what's going on here, let's look specifically at Obadiah. So Israel as a nation, Israel in the north and the south, they've both been destroyed. So Obadiah prophesies to Esau or Edom. They're synonyms here, okay? And about something that was kind of important. See, Esau was Israel's brother. Now, let me kind of backtrack here. If you start out in the book of Genesis, You've got Abraham. He fathered Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. Okay. Now, Jacob was later renamed Israel. And Israel ended up having, well, 12 kids. Let's just leave it at that, and we'll call it even. And so there's a timeline. There's a timeline there. So how does Esau fit into this? Well, Esau is Jacob's brother. If Israel is or Jacob, however you want to call him, is the inheritor of the promise, Esau is the non-inheritor of the promise. And so they have this familial relationship, okay? Israel was Esau's brother by their forefather Isaac, okay? And here's where Obadiah comes in. You see, Esau had mistreated his brother and did some very messed up things. When Israel was being conquered by Babylon, Esau decided to stick their finger in it and did a lot of very corrupt things. And we'll look at some of them tonight. And the basic idea here is that Esau was very happy when his brother was punished by God. And I think that this is a great place to end this, because we're talking about dealing with our enemies, right? We're talking about what happens with the enemies, our friends, or family, or church members. And so then you get to this place of becoming happy when somebody in the church that you don't like is punished. So this is, I can't think of a more perfect place to do this. I'm not this smart. See, I was just reading the prophets, and I kind of got this idea for a sermon or for a sermon series, and they just kind of all fit together. And I was like, oh, that's cool, but it only has 3 parts. And then Dad was all, well, we're going to do this thing, and the last Sunday we're going to cancel the evening service. And I thought, well, hey, I got a 3-part. It just fits perfectly in there. So, well, here we are. So Israel had disobeyed God. They refused to stop sinning, and they just said, I'm going to kind of follow the law a little bit. I mean, we're going to have an air of being righteous, but we're just going to kind of do whatever the heck we want to do, and God's just going to have to kind of be cool with that. But God wasn't cool with that. And so they worshipped other gods, and God was like, nah, you need to stop that. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to. And then they acted very unjustly, didn't bring justice to the poor, for instance. And, God's again like, you really need to knock that off. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to. And so then, he sends all prophets. The laws talked about this, and just like, we're not going to listen to any of that. We have special revelation that supersedes God's revelation, and I can live however I want, and God's just going to bless me for it because God's a loving God. I think I've heard that one before. And so anyways, God brought this nation, the superpower, Babylon, in 586. Well, before that, Judah was conquered in 3 different attacks. But the last final one was in 586. That's when the southern kingdom was actually destroyed, and pretty much just ashes left. And this is just as he said it was going to happen throughout the law and the prophets. And they were still surprised because they were clinging to the promises of God without obeying God. And they were just so flabbergasted. And the closer Babylon came to them, the more they clung to the promises of God. Our land, but they didn't actually want to do the things that God said, if you do this, I will do that. Instead, they said, I have a better addendum, God. Now, hear me on this, okay? I do what I want, and then you do what I want. Yeah? And, God wasn't a big fan of this. He told them multiple times. And still, they, went full throttle. They're like, should we be second guessing this? Nah, it's fine. Just go ahead and shift the gear, And so they just went on their own merry way, and it ended exactly how God said that it would. And they were just completely flabbergasted. And as a nation, they just lost such morale, because here they are, and they're sitting, and they're thinking, God is either not strong enough to save us, or He's just abandoned us. God doesn't love us. It's useless to follow the law. They're thinking all these things, and now that's Israel. Now let's hop over to Esau. Well, while they were being punished by Babylon, Esau joined in, though God hadn't appointed him. You see, God literally raised up Babylon to punish Judah. Literally, He said this. We looked at this last week in the prophet Habakkuk. He said, I'm raising up these terrible, terrible sinners to bring judgment. He totally said that. Yes, I'm doing this. But he never said that he was raising up Esau. However, Esau's all like, you know what? I know that you've got this covered, God, and you've got your plan, but I'm going to help your plan along. Because I see this, and this is just too good. Have you ever had something happen to somebody you just hate, and you're like, haha, is there some way I can get involved in this, man? Well, that's kind of what's happening here. And so he doesn't realize that God has not appointed him like he's appointed Babylon to bring punishment. Although I do tell you, there's a lot of people who think that they've been appointed by God to bring punishment. That's not funny? Okay. It becomes funnier when you have somebody come up to you and say, this is my ministry to you, to wreck your day and ruin your life. This is Obadiah 12. There is no chapter in Obadiah. It's the shortest book in the Old Testament. So when I say Obadiah 12, it's verse 12. Okay. You should not gloat over your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their trouble. Finally, God, they got what they deserved, and they had it coming year after year. You showed them mercy, and that was a waste of time, God. You knew that they were messing up, and you let it slide, but now you're finally putting your foot down, and you gave them what they deserved. And you know what the thing is? They really did get what they deserved. God didn't act unjustly. That was actually what Judah deserved. So Esau really wasn't far off in that. And yet, God's still upset with them for it. So let's keep plowing ahead here. Esau was right that Israel deserved punishment. But they were a little bit happy about it. And not only were they happy about it, but they joined in. You see in Obadiah this progression of stupidity on Esau's part. At first, they're just watching, and they're like, yes. Then they start sticking their finger in. And then we're going to look at this in just a minute. Then they start taking the refugees that are fleeing into their country, and they're like, gotcha. And then killing them and giving them back to the Babylonians too, so that they can kill them. And even going into the land of Judah and taking over some of their land now that their nation is destroyed, and killing them there too. I mean, they're just relentless in this. They really, when they decided to take it out on somebody, they really gave 110% effort here. On the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. See, we have a progression here. First, they're just standing there like, oh, this is good. And then they're like, let me see if I can help. I can help God's plan. I can help it along. But this is a very interesting point that God expected of Esau, but Esau thought that it was okay. Israel's sin was not an excuse for Esau to sin against the sinners. See, that sounds good on paper, but think about people who have hurt you the worst. And now think about all the stupid ways you try and get back at them. Maybe it's a spouse. They do something and you're like, well, I'll do this little snide thing. Nothing you can say about it either because you were wrong. Maybe it's, once again, somebody who really hurt your feelings, somebody who really did you wrong in the past. Hey, it's okay. Gloves are off. You did something stupid. Now I can too. But Israel's sin was not an excuse for Esau to sin against the sinners. That's actually what the Bible calls returning evil for evil. Now you might say, now hold on. I was a person in the right. They wronged me. And you're saying it's wrong for me to react against them? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes. See, because evil doesn't justify evil. It's a very complicated process. Now, before you say, no, it's not that complicated, it is that complicated because you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out how you can get back at somebody. You're really trying to figure out, okay, how can I do this? Maybe if I do this, and you're trying to play this out because you were the one who was wronged, and to let it go would just be, that's above and beyond. But it's okay for me to not let it go and just kind of be a little passive about this. So verse 10 says, because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. Interesting little history lesson here. Without getting too much into the translation of the text, I'll leave that for some other discussion for some other time. What happened to the nation of Edom is they encroached on Judah's territory, and they started taking things from it because, hey, they're destroyed anyways. What are they going to do about it? Well, then eventually, the Persians allowed Israel to go back to the Promised Land. This was in 538. And this is mentioned in Ezra and Nehemiah. This is 20 years after Obadiah prophesies. And gradually, they start, getting their act together until an event called the Maccabean Revolt, the Hasmonean Dynasty, those things that happened between Rome coming in and cussing up the place, but after Persia, this is, you can read about this in the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. I think Josephus references it. And what happens is they slowly started, taking back over the area. And then they finally got the one up on the last remaining Edomites, and they forced them to follow the law and forced them to get circumcised and whatnot. And they, for all intents and purposes, basically became Jews. We'll just simplify things here. And so then what happens is when Rome took over, it kept that provincial name. They called it Idumea for Edom. But then after about 100 AD, the distinct ethnicity of Edom was pretty much done away with. They were, for all intents and purposes, Israelites. And so this literally, they were destroyed forever. Literally, there's no going back. I mean, you'd have to, get Israelites and like withdraw the Edomite blood from them or something. You can't go back from this. So this was literally destroyed. Literally fulfilled, which I thought was kind of interesting. Because the way that Obadiah says it later on in the book is that it says this: you will be a flame, and Esau will be, the spark, the tinder, I forget the word that it uses, but basically the kindling, and that you will go and you will destroy them. You will completely consume them, and that's actually what did happen. They consumed them, and they became, mixed blood with them. Anyways, it's kind of always cool to see the fulfillments of prophecies. So many who call themselves Christians will go around hurting people. They'll go around gossiping behind people's backs and saying snide things and just being overall unpleasant. And I could summarize it by this: being nothing like Jesus. And in fact, I've spent my whole life growing up in the church. I am very familiar with church and Christian culture, and I would say that the majority of churches that I have been to, not all of them, but the majority of them in my years growing up, have been filled with people who call themselves Christians but don't have anything to do with Jesus. I don't see Jesus in these people. They are people who just look for things to start fights about. They just look for something snide to say. They wait to be offended. It's like they just can't wait to start another conflict. And it's surprising to me that you can spend so many years in a church and be just as bitter as you were when you were a kid. It blows me away that people can spend years being in a church without allowing God to change them. The question becoming, why? Why waste your time? I mean, if you're not serious about God changing your heart and having an encounter with God, why waste your time? I mean, that's hours every single week that you're never going to get back. If you're not looking for God to change, why waste your time? I got better things to do, don't you? Don't you have a long to-do list that never seems to get done? Why waste your time like that? And so what happens is that God eventually brings discipline to these people because they're living in sin and they won't stop. But they refuse the lesson, and we talked about this last week, so it becomes pointless, just a pointless waste of time for them, just because it irritates them and it doesn't really produce anything in their character. So for them, it becomes pointless. And then it gets harder as the time gets on and goes on and on and on. And they keep looking for reasons not to repent. And so then what happens to the people who those people offend? They rejoice. Ha ha! Finally that person's getting what they deserved, and God's proving me justified. There's no tears shed for an evil person. The Bible actually says that. And then Proverbs 24:17-18, do not gloat when your enemy falls, when they stumble. Do not let your heart rejoice, or the Lord will see and disapprove and turn his wrath away from them. And I just have to ask the question, if God turns his wrath away from them, I wonder who he would return it to. Think about this. I know it's hard to think when there's a screaming person, but just think about this. If God has his anger turn at someone and he turns it away from that person, where would God's wrath land on? Well, I think Obadiah gives us a pretty clear picture. God's wrath was coming out against Israel. And Esau says, "Ha, you got what you deserved." And what did God do? He turned to who? Esau, the one gloating. He went and, okay, well, they had their turn. And it even says this, Jerusalem drank of my wrath on Jerusalem. I'm sorry, Israel drank of my wrath on Jerusalem. But now the nations are going to. And he kind of switches perspectives. Israel did their time. That doesn't mean that, the cat can, or the mouse can play. Well, they're finally getting what they deserve, and I love it. So then what we do is we hurt them, right? But we find sneaky ways to hurt people. We'll say little comments in passing. They deserved it, and maybe that'll teach you, told you so. Or we love doing little passive-aggressive things. And we love doing it so that we can claim innocence. So we can lie to ourselves about, I didn't do anything wrong. They're the ones who did something wrong. And so we'll do these little passive-aggressive things. We won't just go up to somebody and say, ha! No, we'll find these little passive ways to let them know that we know. To let them know that we got the last laugh. To let them know, ha ha ha, you're screwed, my friend. But me, I was the one who was wronged all these years, and it's okay. It was worth the wait, God. Another thing we love to do is we love to watch them suffer. We're going to refuse to do any good if we have the opportunity, and then our excuse will be, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. We'll kind of steer conversations so that people will talk about them, and we'll kind of encourage gossip, but maybe kind of keep our mouths closed about it so we're not the ones sinning, but still kind of enjoying it all the while and watching them like, ha, 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 ha. We're loving it. Oh, we're eating it up. We just love it. And all the while, we lost the high ground, I think. And something that is continually bothering me about how I deal with my enemies is this very simple, destructive thought. It gets its own slide. Jesus came to us and showed us love instead of hurting. He didn't just look on with apathy and thought, you're getting what you deserve. And what a show of love. And the Bible literally says that we were his enemy when he came and died. So I don't think that this situation is any different than how we deal with our enemies. I really don't think so. So then verse 13 of Obadiah says this, you should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster. See, once again, mounting stupidity, nor gloat over them in their calamity in the day of their disaster. So we've got, okay, they were happy about it. Their attitude against Israel was bad. And they were watching, they were enjoying it, but then they started getting involved. Now it's not just their attitude anymore, now it's their actions too. See, we don't want to surrender our heart to God, and we're going to keep bitter in our hearts, and then we want to pretend like it's not going to spread. It's not going to change how we treat people. It's not going to spread out to other people. I tell you what, if there's a person in your life that you hate, give it time, and there will be another person. There will always be another person. Because it's that attitude that spreads. And then eventually it'll change how you live. Eventually. Nor gloat over them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. So there's a lot of bad things happening here, going into their gate, gloating over them, taking their stuff. Man, oh man. Esau was profiting from their loss. Esau was profiting from their destruction and pain. And they were saying the whole time, it's better for me. I'm better off with them suffering. Of course you're better off when your enemies suffer. God didn't call us to be better off, though. And Jesus certainly wasn't better off when he decided to come and die for us. The thing is, in life, you're going to have many opportunities where you will be better off without them in the way. And yet, God has called us to pray for our enemies. Life is not about finding the quickest way to slide down, well, the slide. Life is more about trying to help that other kid that has boogers running down his face get to the slide. That kind of makes sense? So whereas we are searching for this way to make life the most pleasant and carefree, struggle-free existence, God is destined to ruin that plan and to make it where we have to love people and serve them and care for them and nasty things like that. But this is what he said. One of the last things he said before he left, he said this, do you love me? Oh, yeah, God, I love you. I'm super spiritual. If only the pastor was as spiritual as me, if only the worship leader was as spiritual as me, if only this person was as spiritual as me, then feed my sheep. Oh, dang it. I knew there was going to be a catch. And then he even asked two more times. He says, hey, do you love me? Well, yeah, I mean, I guess. Depends what do you define as loving you, God? And I'm spiritual. I think that's pretty loving. And that's kind of what we do. I go to church. I go through the routines. I'm a real spiritual person. I know all kinds of things about the Bible. Then feed my sheep if you love me. Well, I hate people. Well, then you hate God. Well, okay, how about this? I love people and they can stay over there. If you say that you love people and yet there's no action of that love doesn't exist. That love is a lie. It's easy to say, I have no problems with anybody. I love everybody when you're not doing anything to help anybody. That's super easy to say. I can say that. Hey, I love Chuck. No, I'm just kidding, Chuck. So then we get to verse 14 here. You should not wait at the crossroads. And this is the climax of their stupidity, the most hurtful thing that they did in all the book. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over the survivors in the day of their trouble. They literally set up a guard to catch refugees who came to them for help. They set out to do something evil. It's different when you stumble upon and you're just like, I'm going to do something evil. This wasn't that. They set out with this goal of destroying somebody else's life. Oh, well, I would never get to that point. You don't really get how sin progresses, do you? And not only that, but make no mistake, God sees your heart. And you might keep yourself nice and happy with the lies about how you aren't like that, but God knows your heart and your intentions. And oftentimes, God will judge us for what we intended in our heart just as much as if our hands had carried it out. So don't forget that. But God, they were getting what they deserved. Yeah, and now you will too. The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done back to you. And your deeds will return upon your own head. This is not the same. These two statements, they sound the same, but they're not. Let me kind of break them down. The first one is like the golden rule, right? As you have done, it will be done to you. Okay, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's simple. But the second idea is not saying that. It's saying your deeds, the things that you have done, and you're plotting to destroy somebody else, it will return upon your own head. The evil that you have set out for someone else's destruction is going to actually destroy you. That's a different idea. So, but God, they're getting what they deserved, and now you will too. You should not gloat or rejoice when others or a brother or sister in Christ suffers. It shouldn't make you happy when someone who is bound in sin finds punishment for being bound in sin. And yet, that is exactly what we do if somebody irritates us enough. So what do we want? Well, we don't necessarily want somebody to die. I mean, sometimes we do. But oftentimes we make it out a lot better than that. We don't really want somebody to die. We want them to suffer a little bit, and then we also kind of, maybe just a little bit be proven right. And then maybe if it isn't too much to ask, have a big showy apology where everybody sees and there's a scene and you've got it all planned out, right? It's on this veranda. The sun's shining down. There's a vine that grows over the thing. And you're standing there in elegant, robes. And they walk in, and all your friends are gathered around, and everybody down in the city below can hear, "I am sorry," and you're like, "Yes, yes." And then the birds fly. Oh, it's great. And then you have a photographer that you've hired just for the situation, who's actually hanging down from the overhang, right there. Blam, he gets the perfect shot. Yes. Print it out, put it on a nice piece of mahogany wood, and put it up on your office, so you can always remember that one time that they apologized. That's what we really want. That's what we really want. With humility. Yes, of course, because we're so humble, waiting for somebody else to fall. So now we're going to go two questions that we really didn't have time to look at throughout this sermon. The first question is, are you supposed to help an enemy? This is a complicated question. And so I'm going to say a couple ideas, and then we're going to kind of wrap it all up together. Okay, first off, Esau shouldn't have interfered with Israel's punishment. If you see someone being punished, you should not interfere. God's doing something, keep your fingers out of it. Don't help him, don't help it along, butt out. That's the first thing. I've seen many parents live to regret interfering with God, trying to teach their kids something. And, then they went on to tell me about how they shouldn't have done that. And so I don't have to do that same thing to know that I shouldn't do that. But Esau didn't have to help. They didn't have to hurt the hurting. When God's dealing with somebody and you see that they're hurting, you don't have to hurt them further. Even if you really don't like them, you still don't have to hurt them further. And now I want to say this. There's a difference between not helping, actively hurting, and actively helping. Okay? So out of those three things, do not actively hurt. Okay? So should I not help, or should I actively help? Well, it's more complicated than that, because there's this thing called enabling somebody. Basically, and I've heard this a lot in church, hanging out with somebody who's gossiping because they're so hurt, they need somebody who will give them an ear. All that does is get you into the gossip group and enables them to keep gossiping. Nothing has been resolved. Another thing is it helps you and them to have bad attitudes. So that didn't really help anything. Jesus didn't solve everyone's problem when he came, and we don't have to either. There are some people out there who you can't do anything for, and they don't want you to do anything for. It's not your fault if someone else doesn't want to grow. Jesus did not come and solve everybody's problem when he came. And he doesn't expect us to either. That's a hard lesson to get, because we don't want to actually read what the Bible has to say about these things, but then we want to kind of have a strong opinion whenever we see somebody suffering. And so here's what we do. Sometimes we don't get our attitude right with an enemy, and then when they're punished, we feel bad because we never got over our bad attitude. So then we feel like we have to get involved and save them from their punishment because we know that our attitude was wrong. The thing is, that doesn't actually change how our attitude was, and it doesn't do anything to further do. It's like basically trying to earn penance, right? Instead, it would be a lot more healthy if you went to God and asked for forgiveness and then spent time praying for them. Now, once again, I know this is a complicated issue, and I'm trying to slowly walk us through this. So we're not actively hurting, and we might be actively helping, but a lot of times we're just kind of butting out and keeping our hands to ourselves. And that's not necessarily what we always do, and I'll explain this in just a second. So the next thing that we definitely can and should do is pray. You definitely should be praying for them, blessing them, praying for your enemies. This is what the Bible says. But I don't want them to be blessed and doing the wrong thing. I want them to change. Did you know that just because you ask for something doesn't mean God's going to answer it? But did you also know that God asked you or told you to ask him to bless them? So how about you let God be God and kind of just butt out and do what he told you to do? See, we have a hard time doing that because we like to have like a say in it. And God said that there's no argument here. Why are you still arguing with me? It's like the other day, I told one of my kids to do something, and it wasn't like a hey, can you do this? It was like a hey, you left your mess out, go clean it up. And they kind of were started to talk to me about why they had done it and their plans. And I said, why are you still standing there? Go. And that's kind of similar to what God's doing. He's saying, okay, you need to pray for your enemies. Well, God, here's the thing. I have all these reasons, and what are you doing still standing there? Go pray for them. Anyways, and don't withhold good. I know this sounds confusing, but you shouldn't be seeking out your enemies, trying to see if there's any way that you can interfere with their life. Live your life and keep praying. Give them the space that God needs to work what he's doing. But if the opportunity presents itself, do not withhold good. I'll give you a good example. You see them broke down on the side of the road with something that you could help with, help them. That would be withholding good. That would be a bad thing. Okay? I hope that this is kind of helping you sort through this. Don't withhold good, but typically stay out of the way. Esau should have butt out, but then when the refugees came knocking on his door, he should have helped the refugees. Makes sense, doesn't it? And that's exactly what God actually says to Esau. He should have butt out, and then he should have helped the refugees. See, a lot of times you're going to see people be punished, and all that you can do is really pray and stay out of it. And then, when they're picking up the pieces, help them pick up the pieces. But I told them, I tried to, okay, fine. So you were right. You win a prize. Now, in the meantime, help them pick up the pieces. And that's a very difficult thing because our pride gets in the way, and we really want to have that just one last victory, hurrah, of how we were right. We really are pretty fickle. So I guess I can summarize all this by saying this. Don't enjoy punishment and don't help it along. Don't take offense to good things happening to them. Sometimes we're okay with them not being punished, but when something good happens to them, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. We just kind of, hold on, God. I was not going to be happy if you were punishing them, but I'm very unhappy that you've chosen to bless them. I was the one who was wronged. You should be blessing me. And all the while, we're overlooking at the blessings that God has given us. So that's the first thing. Are you supposed to help? Well, it's not all that simple. And I think that I've walked you through as well as I can, but there's going to be something where God impresses something on your heart as you spend time in prayer. And it's important that you allow God to walk you through a situation on an individual basis. Sometimes God's going to have you do something that doesn't make sense, or he's going to have you act a certain way in a certain context. And it's important that you're sensitive to what God's trying to lead you through, if that kind of makes sense. And it's important that you don't sin against your conscience. If you, in your heart of hearts, know that there's something you should do, and you don't do it, for you, that'll be a sin. Because you know what God wants you to do, and you've chosen not to do it. Now, I'm not talking about those times when you're just like, what should I do? So that was the first thing, first question I kind of want to look at as to the, closing out this whole conversation on, dealing with their enemies. So are you supposed to help them? Are you supposed to help your enemies? The second question is, do you really have to be friends with everybody? And the answer to that is no. You don't have to be best friends with everyone. I know for a lot of us, it's like, what? Hear me out, okay? The problem is that we typically don't stay away from people that we typically stay away from people that we shouldn't, and don't stay away from people that we should. That's the real problem. So there's people who need to hear about Jesus. I'm not going to hang out with sinners. But then there's people who are sinners in the church, stirring up problems and whatnot. Oh, well, I'm going to hang around with them. It's like, well, maybe not the smartest thing to do. So this is what I could say. There are many people you should stay away from. 1 Corinthians gives us one list of people in the church who call themselves Christians that we should stay away from. And another one he tells us in Romans chapter 16. I urge you, brothers and sisters, to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them. I urge you, I strongly encourage you in this thing, divisive people, stay away from them. Stay away from divisive people. Well, that's not a very Christian thing. Well, somebody should have told Paul that. Because I'm pretty sure that that it is a Christian thing. It's in the Bible. That makes it pretty Christian. And you don't have to be best friends with everyone. If there's someone who has a divisive spirit, you should stay away from them. You should stay away from them. That's exactly what you should do. Another thing is the Bible talks about is leaders who are teaching heresy. These are things that the Bible takes the time to warn us about. Yet we, in our infinite pride, have to make it all about us. Well, I'm going to love everybody. It didn't say hate them. It said keep away from them. Well, how can you love somebody and keep your distance from them? So I'm going to disobey the Bible, and then when I get into a bad situation, I'm just the victim. No, you're not listening to what God told you to do when he said to keep away from the divisive person. Contentious people, divisive people, here's the thing. They will try to make divisions, and they'll try to get offended. They will literally try to do it. Regardless of whether they're doing it on purpose or not, they will set out to do this. And then they'll say it's your fault when you get upset. They'll wait for you to have a reaction. They'll just wait for it so that they can say, see, I was the one who was wronged in all this. It's like an alcoholic sitting in a bar, waiting for when somebody offers him a drink and then says, it was your fault that I got drunk. So what we do is we say, no, I'm going to keep on hanging out with contentious people. But here's the thing. If you do, it will be impossible to keep a good attitude. If you constantly subject yourself to someone stuck in sin, it will become you. They will suck you in. It will rub on you. Bad company corrupts good morals is another thing the Bible says. It will be impossible to keep a good attitude. So then we keep doing the same stupid thing. I'm going to keep hanging around with divisive people because that's what Jesus would do. No, it's not what Jesus would do. And then when we don't act like a Christian, we get all upset. Well, then, I messed up again. Now, I forgive me, God, but I'm going to go back to that same bad situation I shouldn't have been in the first place. Wisen up. You do not have to be best friends with everybody. There are definitely people that you should be staying away from. Now, I'm not talking about people who struggle. There's lots of people who struggle. I struggle. Everybody struggles. I'm talking about people who are setting out to be a divisive person. This is the difference. If somebody always has a conflict with somebody, that would be a divisive person. If somebody has conflicts that come, that's not a divisive person. You understand the difference? When there's people who surround themselves with people who gossip, well, that would be probably a gossip. When there's somebody who on occasion says something that is gossip, everybody's going to accidentally gossip at some point in their life. It doesn't mean that you're the world's worst person. I would say make sure to close your mouth next time, but it's not a habit when you do it one time. Do you know what I mean? And we just have to reach the point of being okay with that. So anyways, distance yourself from some people. And I think that those are the last two things I really had to emphasize because it didn't really come up in the prophets. Are you supposed to help them? It's complicated. Should you be best friends with everybody? Once again, it's complicated. I changed the Facebook status from in a relationship to it's complicated. But I do want to say this, and then we're going to close out, okay? The first thing, you can't help those who don't want help. I know this is a hard thing to do, but it's very true. You cannot help those who don't want help. Now, don't refrain from what you know, and don't sin against your conscience, but you can't help those who don't want help. A lot of people wear themselves out trying to make somebody change when they don't want to change. And then they burn themselves out and don't have the energy for the people who actually do want to change. Some pastors are afraid to deal with problem people. So because of that, those problem people run off the good people. It happens. Now, with all those things being said, I need to clarify one more thing, and that's this. Okay, so when people gossip, and you go, here's a good example. You're a pastor talking to another pastor. Watch out for these people. They've caused problems. What a gossip will say is, see, you're gossiping too. It's not gossip if you're warning another pastor about a gossip. You understand the difference? Here's another example. I was once talking to a gossip, and I said, you have a problem with gossiping. You're gossiping about me right now. What? See, something happens with our ego when we live in sin. We just can't be told anything. We just become like kind of like a, ugh. And I don't know if these people actually believe these crazy things. But I mean, I have more crazy things than that too that I could tell you about, But here's the thing: church discipline, it's not evil. It's protecting others. When a church board or staff or whatever has to start taking steps to bring somebody into correction, like asking them to leave the church, for instance, that's not something that you do with joy. That's something that you do for the sake of others. Not because it's the best solution, but because it's the only solution that is left. And God bringing punishment is not evil. It's him bringing justice. And that's his realm, not yours. And so remember these things when you're dealing with your enemies, especially if they're in the church. So let's wrap this up, because I don't know what time it is, but it's time for me to go snuggle up with my blankie and little bear. So how does this apply to us? First off, Esau got more and more and more and more involved in Israel's punishment, as people always do. We get this idea, well, I'll just help it along. It's like that one commercial. I think Home Depot can help, or Lowe's can help. You can do it, we can help. Or was it Home Depot? I think it was Home Depot. And we have the same kind of concept with God here. God can do it, but we can help. Well, I don't think that God needed your help, but kind of an important point. Another thing that I think that we can draw out from the Prophet Obadiah is that attitudes spread. So instead, why don't you work on you? It is evil to rejoice in your brother or sister's suffering, and you will be repaid for that evil. God will remember about what you did to somebody else, and he will repay you. Remember that. So instead, you work on you. And then the last thing to say, treat others like you want to be treated. Pray for them what you want for you. And sometimes I hear people say, well, I just don't know what to pray. I don't know if I'm praying the right thing. Let me just kind of clear that up. You won't pray perfect, but God intercedes. So you just keep praying your imperfect prayers and let God do what he does best. I think that works pretty well. So I've left you every single one of these parts. I've left you with a little go and do this week, and this is what I'm going to say. Since I don't have one next week, I'm going to say for the rest of the month, the last 2 weeks. This is your assignment, your homework. Throughout this holiday season, bless and do not curse. Now I said that real easy. It was really easy to say, and you heard it real easy, but it's the actual taking it and doing it that's going to be a little bit difficult. So remember, bless and do not curse throughout the holidays. Lord, I thank you for your word, and I thank you for what you're doing in us and through us. And God, I just pray you'd help us to stop trying to police our enemies and instead be submitted to you. Help us, God, to come to you and say, Lord, I forgive them. Lord, you do a work in me. They are none of my responsibility. They're not my concern. That's in your realm. And Lord, forgive us for the times in the past that we've stuck our fingers where it didn't belong and said things that were better off left unsaid. Lord, help us not to just do the bare minimum of being the person who is right in a situation, but help us to age well. And as there's more shots fired, that we wouldn't return fire. Lord, help us to be what people have missed in the church in the past, a representation of you. God, help us to do better where the church in the past has failed to bring Christ. Change our hearts, God. Help us to stay humble and to treat people in a way for your glory.